Summer coaching and accountability groups are just around the corner. Our registration event, our next one, is on Wednesday, June 21st at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 Eastern, and you asked for it and we listened. We're bringing back an evening section, Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Learn more and start your pre-registration by going to coachingrewired.com. And yes, we're still offering $500 off select sections.
This group is like an iceberg. The surface level benefits are obvious. Increasing productivity, managing time blindness, learning how to plan effectively based on your values and personal goals. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. What lies underneath is so much more amazing and massive and powerful.
Go to coachingrewired.com. Okay, more info at the break. Now, let's get on with the episode. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Marcy Caldwell. Marcy is a psychologist, writer, and proud mom of two who has been helping adults with ADHD thrive in their work, relationships, and parenting for over 20 years. She is a passionate advocate for adults with ADHD and is dedicated to helping them create environments that unlock their unique genius of their brains. So we're going to talk today about emotional regulation. Marcy is the founder of adept.org, ADDEPT.org, which is a blog and digital resource for adults with ADHD. She's also the owner of Rittenhouse. Did I say that right? Rittenhouse?
Yep.
Okay. Rittenhouse Psychological Services, a practice specializing in adult ADHD in the Philadelphia area, and the creator of Meltdown to Mastery. So let's just kind of dive into this. So how did you get into the world of ADHD?
First of all, thank you so much for having me, and I'm thrilled to be here. So I got into the world of ADHD in kind of a roundabout sort of way. When I first started out in psychology, I did a lot of psychological assessment. When you do psychological assessment with adults, you see a lot of folks with ADHD. I also had a therapy practice, and in the process of doing assessments, I would sometimes refer people for therapy. And after telling me their life story, they often didn't want to go find some other provider to then have to tell their life story to again. So my practice started to fill with folks with ADHD. At the same time, I met my husband who has ADHD. All of a sudden, it just felt like my whole life was ADHD. And they don't teach about ADHD in grad school at all. I don't know if that was your experience too, but
it's common.
Yeah. You know, I think I got maybe one afternoon lecture on it in my whole 6 years. And I went out and sought out a lot more training, some mentorship, and eventually kind of found that that was an area that I loved. I love ADHD brains. I love the way they work. I love the energy they bring to a room. I love the way they think creatively. I really enjoy being with folks with ADHD. There's a lot about ADHD that I relate to very personally. And yet, you know, I found that because of the unique way that my brain is wired, I often kind of paired well with ADHD brains to kind of create systems that worked for them. So eventually that became my thing and my passion and where I spent all my time.
So as you said, your husband has ADHD. You said you relate to a lot of the things ADHD related, but you also do not have ADHD yourself.
The honest truth is I have no freaking clue. Right? Because there are a lot of things about, I think I'm somewhere in the messy middle.
Okay.
There are a lot of things about ADHD that I very strongly relate to. There are some things that I definitely don't on a personal level. And at this point, I'm kind of can't really be tested, right? Like at this point in my career, like it no test would be valid on me. And
say more about that. Why would that be?
Because I know all the tests, right? Like I've done them all. I've seen them all. I know the answers to them all. So I find the messy middle as being the place that feels most authentic to me. I do not feel fully neurotypical, but I also do not feel, it feels like it doesn't do the ADHD experience justice when I identify as ADHD either, right? I'm comfortably uncomfortable in the messy middle.
I'm actually kind of fascinated with what you're saying here for kind of personal reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So over the last kind of month or so, there's been some things that I've kind of become aware of that has been really making me question if I actually might also be on the autism spectrum,
Hmm.
which is to me a little bit of a mind fuck,
Hmm.
because I've worked with autism for so long,
Hmm.
and I've always related to certain features of it, and kind of like, yeah, there's feature we relate to features, and it's like, wait a minute, maybe there's more to just relating to some of the features. Maybe there's actually more going on. So it's been
Hmm.
a really sort of ground shifting question that I've been sort of asking myself, and I'm probably going to be pursuing an actual diagnosis.
Hmm.
So I can very much appreciate being in that kind of messy middle space
Yeah.
around that, being that working in the field, and then going, wait a minute, me too, maybe that's a fun space to be in.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So, in some of the things that you, sort of talked about, you mentioned when we first talked about, like, the regulatory differences. Like, what do you mean
Hmm.
by that?
Regulatory differences of ADHD brains,
Well, for your I think you said
or
for your
for myself. Yep.
for yourself.
Yeah. So I like to think of ADHD brains as, having kind of like on off switches, right? A neurotypical brain would have a whole bunch of dimmer switches, and an ADHD brain would be a whole bunch of on off switches. And it's much more comfortable in extremes. And
Mm.
that is something that I very much relate to, that I operate much more comfortably in extremes. You asked me earlier during sound check what I had for breakfast, and I said I was doing intermittent fasting. The reason I do that, I am much more comfortable in extremes, right? Like
Mm.
I would rather eat or not eat. I don't like the whole like I have to meter this out and be moderate about it. I don't like that. That doesn't work well for me.
It's harder. A lot of times it is
It's
harder.
harder, yeah. And so that middle ground, I think, is really hard to find, and that is something that is very true for me, and it's also something that is very true for ADHD brains.
Now, when you say this on-off switch, 'cause I when I was first diagnosed with ADHD over 20 years ago, one of the ways that I sort of thought about it was sort of having this faulty on-off switch
Mhm.
that, like, it's sometimes just as hard as it is to kinda turn on and to activate, it could be equally as hard to turn off and to stop and kind of transition.
Mhm.
Are you talking about more than activation and stopping when you talk about this, like, having these on-off switches?
Yeah, so I think of our brains as having multiple switches, right? So we have activation, we have energy, we have focus, we have volume, we have all these different things that either that for ADHD brains kind of go all in or all out.
Mhm.
And sometimes it can feel mysterious as to which end of that equation that's going to land on. And that neurotypical brains tend to be able to find that just right middle much more easily. Classic example is that an ADHD kid in a classroom tries to whisper to the person next to them and can't get that volume right, and the teacher hears every single time. Whereas the neurotypical kid next to him, does it just fine. So for all of our brain functions, I think we have these different types of switches. And the ADHD brain tends to kind of operate in those extremes, and the neurotypical brain in the middle more easily.
I think a lot of listeners are very much relating to that right now, and a lot of probably head nodding. So you went from primarily doing the assessment and diagnosis to doing more ADHD management treatment.
Mhm.
What are some of the things that you really look at when you are working with folks with ADHD?
I like to think of there being three components to the ADHD experience. There's the regulatory, these kind of on off switches, and then there's the practical, right? And that's kind of how those on off switches show up in everyday life. So sometimes I think of that as like the over part of the iceberg. The regulatory is underneath and what people feel but don't necessarily see on the outside. The practical is, of course, all the procrastination and the time management, all the ways that on off switch shows up and often rubs against our neurotypical world. And then the third part is the emotional, and the emotional is in part due to the regulatory, right? Because emotions also tend to happen in this kind of on off sort of way, but then also really comes from living in a world that's not really built to support and celebrate an ADHD brain, and the shame and the discomfort and everything that comes from that. And so when I'm working with folks, I'm always trying to look at all three of those. A lot of times people come with one or the other as their primary concern. But if we ignore the other two completely, inevitably one of them kind of like drags the other ones down, that they can drag each other down or drag each other up, right? And so I always want to be mindful of all three and how they interconnect.
Hmm. So when you're working with your clients, do you have like, is it generally they come to you with here's what's going on in my life and I need help? Or do you have more of a structured approach to here's the things that we can go over and kind of work through? Like how do you do that work?
So we tend to work with a structure at the very beginning, and then we go where people need us to go, right? So we have a very structured process in the beginning of our work that helps us kind of get the lay of the land and see where the areas are. But we always want to start with what people are bringing to us, right? Like if you come to me and you say, I really need help with X, and I'm like, well, that's great, but I want to do, Y over here. That's really annoying. And like I came for X. If you go to the doctor and you're like, my ear is hurting, and they're like, great, but I want to work on your toe. It's like, well, thanks. So we start where people are for sure. But the process that we do at the beginning kind of helps us get a lay of the land. We do something called a baseline system assessment, which kind of looks at what are all the systems that you have in place? What have you tried? What haven't you tried? What's your history with it? What are your feelings about these things? And it looks at it's as if we had this bird's eye view of what's going on in your present day life. That helps us see kind of where the vulnerabilities might be, see where the areas that might require more structure, more support. And so that helps us on the practical level. And as we're talking about that, the regulatory and the emotional tend to kind of come along.
Absolutely. It's when, like in my coaching groups, one of the things I often say is that like when we are learning time management strategies and planning skills, and like when you have ADHD, it is never just about time management skills and planning skills.
God, no.
Like the emotional part of it is so palpable in session. And so it's what I love doing group, because it normalizes this like, oh god, because it's not just about planning the week. It's about all the stories
Mhm.
we've have built up over the years about, oh yeah, I've
Mhm.
tried this like 10,000 times and this hasn't really worked for me. So why am I going to feel that this is going to be any different, right? And that's a real feeling to work through,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I know that big feelings are a big part of ADHD. So what I want to do right after we take a break is sort of dive into, kind of acknowledging what do these big feelings with ADHD look like, maybe how they're different from, other disorders where emotional self-regulation is a key part of that disorder, and then what some of the tools and strategies that people can really use to really help ground themselves a little bit and turn the volume down on the intensity of those emotions so they can actually do the things that they are wanting and intending on doing. So, Marcy, we're going to take a quick break and we will be right back. Support for this podcast comes from ADHD Rewired's coaching and accountability groups. You can learn more at coachingrewired.com. Are you looking for a supportive space where you can also gain practical skills, develop emotional acceptance, and take action on your good intentions? Does it feel like your ADHD holds you back from achieving your most important goals? Coaching can help. Go to coachingrewired.com to get your name on our interest list so you can join us for our next summer registration event, which is tomorrow, Wednesday, June 21st at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 Eastern. That is, if you're listening to this on the date it came out. Our summer season of coaching and accountability groups begins on July 13th and goes through September 21st. We've had over 1,000 adults with ADHD complete our 10-week coaching program, where members have changed careers, completed continuing education programs and PhDs, improved relationships, developed new habits, and so much more. To get more information and to secure your spot for our summer sessions, go to coachingrewired.com. Add your name to our summer interest list and join us for our next registration event tomorrow, June 21st. And if that date has passed, go to the website to find out when the next one is. Registration is by invitation only, so once you sign up, you'll receive instructions on what you'll need to do next. Once you're done, don't forget to hit that RSVP button so you can actually join us. So if you're ready to move beyond just managing your ADHD and start thriving with your ADHD, don't wait. That's coachingrewired.com. Start your pre-registration process. We can't wait to meet you. That's coachingrewired.com. All right, we are back with Marcy Caldwell. All right, Marcy, so how do we know the difference between the emotional storms and the emotional regulation challenges that are so often seen with ADHD, and say the emotional storms and emotional regulation challenges that come with other disorders, things like autism or even like borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder? How do you weed those apart? And does it matter?
It's a really great question. And I love the end of your question because I think that's really important too. Does it matter? Yes, kind of. It depends. To some degree, we're going to treat the symptoms or we're going to help support the difference, right? Whatever is going on, we want to help with what's going on. We're going to help with the struggle. It can help to understand where it comes from, both in terms of the tools that we use and the lens that we see those tools through. So for example, for years, particularly women with ADHD have been misdiagnosed as bipolar or borderline personality disorder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Men have too, but I think women in greater numbers. And they have been treated, that those emotional storms have been treated with some of the tools that we use to treat the emotional storms of ADHD, but without the understanding of how the ADHD brain works, therefore less effective and more shame-inducing, right? Because when we understand more about how we got to where we are, we're more able to give ourselves some compassion, more able to give ourselves the room to have this just be what I am. This is the way my brain works, rather than this is a terrible thing about who I am, right? So sure. I'm very careful in my diagnosis. I'm very slow in my diagnosis. I think there's a lot of harm that can come in misdiagnosis. And at the same time, even while I'm being slow, we can still work on what's happening, right? In terms of how do we differentiate, a lot of what I look at for ADHD brains is a timeline of the mood and the mood storms, right? For example, ADHD brains tend to have large emotions in response to things like rejection, failure, perceived rejection, perceived failure, forecasted failure, right? Like it can just be a long list. And then I'm never going to get through this. And then that simulates a storm, right? And from somebody else's perspective, they may not put two and two together. They may not see that list, and it can seem like it comes from out of nowhere. But when you kind of really if you get really detailed in, okay, so what happened there? What were you looking at? What was going on? What were you thinking about as you were sitting at your desk, right? Like, then we can start to see where that storm originated. And then equally, the positive mood and the, what I call like the sparkliness that can come with ADHD is equally kind of triggered by success, by positive feedback, right? By connection, by another person's energy, right? Like these are all things that kind of trigger that up. And that up, unfortunately, has often been misdiagnosed as kind of a hypomanic episode, but it isn't necessarily. Sometimes it's just like, I'm just happy and in it, right? And I'm just like very in the emotion. Sometimes they say that ADHD brains are like fish bowls, and that the emotion is like you put a little dye packet in that fish bowl, and all of a sudden the water is whatever that color is, right? And so if that water is suddenly happy, then I'm really happy and all things are painted happy. And if that water is suddenly angry, then all things are painted angry. And so when we do a timeline, when we really kind of start to see where that originated, that often helps in that diagnosis.
And why does that matter? Like, why does like understanding that the antecedent comes externally for the storm when looking at ADHD compared to other things, kind of differential diagnosis? Why does that matter?
Yeah, so let's say if we're doing a differential between bipolar and ADHD, the antecedent is often more internal and often kind of more chemically related. If we're doing that, would
In
also be
bipolar,
in bipolar.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry. That's also true for, let's say, PMDD, premenstrual dysphoria disorder, when it's a more hormonally related and more neurotransmitter related issue, then we're going to look at something that's not going to be as easily defined by an external stimuli. If we're differentiating between borderline personality disorder, and this is where things get really, like, all of this is messy, right?
Yeah.
And this is why we go slow, because somebody who has bipolar disorder will often have a reason that their brain stuck to that felt like the trigger, right? But that the mood actually kind of starts a little bit before that trigger, and then the brain looks for the trigger. And that's just our brain's natural kind of sense
And
making
that's for
capability.
bipolar disorder.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
If we look at borderline personality disorder, they tend to have kind of large emotional storms around perceived rejection or being left, right? Kind of rupture in relationships. So lots of overlap there with ADHD, right? But they're not going to show it for the, to-do list. So we have to look at multiple storms and see, are they centering on one particular stimuli, or is it multiple? And are these emotions kind of always happening in this on-off sort of way?
How much, when you're looking at specifically with ADHD, how much do you think that the emotional storms that are sort of triggered by external events are more of a trauma response versus something internally or more organically related to just ADHD?
Yeah, so there's another very tricky overlap. And I think to some degree we want to differentiate between those, what psychologists call big T traumas versus little T traumas, right? And that if we're talking a big T trauma, i.e. rape, murder, war sorts of things, then it can have those kinds of that same kind of flooding that can happen. And with the what are called little T traumas, which isn't to dismiss them at all, because little T traumas are very real and have very big effect, then those are a little bit more. Let me actually start this question over.
Of course.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need you to ask again.
I will try. Okay.
Thanks.
So when you look at sort of the emotional storms, so we say with ADHD, it's more externally triggered, whether it's the to-do list or failures, perceived failures. How do you differentiate between that sort of organically ADHD related and a trauma response? Because I think that a huge part of, especially for adults, is that sort of complex PTSD, that trauma by 1,000 paper cuts type of response. So, like, how do you differentiate those? And again, does that matter?
Yeah, so I think this is really in one place. So I do always want to do a differential with PTSD, right? Because if there is what we call re-experiencing symptoms, if we're really flooded by a experience that's happening over and over and being recreated in our brains over and over again, as if it's happening right now, then that needs to be treated in a slightly different way. If how it's showing up is more in that CPTSD, sort of way with the 1,000 paper cuts, then that then gets to that point of we're probably going to treat it the same way. That gets it to the point of this is what the emotional experience of ADHD is right now. And I say right now because I'm hopeful that we could help to make this better in future generations. But right now, this is very much the experience that it has been a lifetime of being told that you're wrong, a lifetime of really feeling like there's something at my core that is wrong with me rather than something different about how my brain works. And therefore, this is what we do. This is, we're always going to be looking at these two parts of the emotional experience, the history as well as the regulation. And we're always going to be playing on both sides of that spectrum.
What I would love to do is take one more quick break. And when we come back, I would love for us to kind of dive into specific strategies for how do we navigate these emotional storms. Because we know that with ADHD, we have so many good intentions. And there's, so many different ways that our intentions don't turn into action. Emotions being one of the big culprits for that. So when we come back, let's kind of dive into some strategies that we can work on when emotions are getting the best of us and the ADHD is winning as a result. So we will be right back. Hey, do you want to listen to this podcast without interruption? You can enjoy full episodes uninterrupted by going to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon and become a patron for just $5 a month or more. Find all the perks at the website, including our monthly coaching calls for only $25 a month. Thank you so much for your support. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And if you're looking for an online co-working space that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, then we've got you covered in our 24/7 drop-in room in our Adult Study Hall membership community at adultstudyhall.com. There, you can take advantage of our weekly themed and guided sessions. We have sessions for cleaning and decluttering, your most dreaded tasks, writing, creative work, and more. Join our ADHD-friendly body doubling community to get those to-dos to done. That's adultstudyhall.com. All right, we are back with Marcy Caldwell. All right, Marcy, so let's talk strategies. I think, everyone's ADHD is a little bit of a different flavor for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we all experience these emotions in different degrees, Even when we just look at procrastination most of the time is just a self-regulatory strategy. We're trying to alleviate some kind of uncomfortable feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you help your clients? You created this whole program called From Meltdown to Mastery. So talk a little bit about some of the skills and the things that you work on with your clients that we can really start using and trying to use today.
I believe in the power of understanding. I think that's probably one of my greatest beliefs is that kind of guides how I work. And so I feel like when we have a better understanding of where we are emotionally, we're more able to respond. And that our response really needs to be about how intense our emotions are rather than what we're feeling necessarily, right? Because emotions come in 5 trillion different flavors, right? If we had a different response for every single different emotion and every situation that emotion might exist in, right? Like this is a never-ending number of responses, which is way too complicated for any brain to keep track of. And so I like to keep things simple. So I like to think about kind of a emotion meter that goes from green to yellow to orange to red, right? And the red emotions are when it has taken over our body and our brain is actually really no longer on board. Our brain, at least the higher order thinking of our brain, has shut off and we are fully in our body and our body is screaming to get out of there, right? And we will do anything and we will destroy all of our values, intentions, and goals to get out, to make it go away. So our response in red is very different than our response even in orange or yellow or green. In orange, we're very much in our head, right? Like the body, it's no longer a body takeover, that we haven't kind of been hijacked in the same way. we're in our head, we're mulling things over. It's really hard to distract us from it. Like, it's very present, but it's no longer that kind of red level screaming, throwing things, right? Like, we're no longer hijacked by this kind of monster. But it's torturesome because we're so in our head and it's so all we can think about. Once we get into yellow, we're a little bit more, we're what I call, or not what I call, one famous psychologist long before me called wise brain, right? Where we have this both access to our thinking selves, our rational part of ourselves, but also access to our emotions. So we get the wisdom of both. We're able to be distracted at this point. Like, we're able to go do something else, but we're also able to think about this and we're able to kind of call up the emotion of it.
Now, when you say able to be distracted, are you saying that sometimes the intentional use of distraction can be a tool?
Yes, for sure.
Well, that's great news. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I actually think that intentional use of distraction, I use more for kind of surfing through orange. That orange, when we're so in our heads, if we can, and this is particularly true for ADHD brains that are living in the fishbowl. And so, like, if we can intentionally drop another dye packet in there, let's do it. Also, if we can keep ourselves busy as our bodies are kind of processing what's going on, let's do it. I recommend to people that they have distraction menus, that they have a menu of things that they can go to, not to make themselves feel better necessarily, right? Because, like, it feels terrible. We just own that. It's going to feel terrible. But what can I do to keep myself busy while I'm feeling terrible and while that feeling is kind of like subsiding? So I think of orange as how my mom used to treat me when I was sick, right? Like, so I had a cold. It wasn't going to get better necessarily depending on what she did or didn't do, but I needed to kind of get through the discomfort of it. So she would put me on the couch, she would comfort me with my favorite foods and a blanket, and she'd turn on the TV to distract me, to get me through that period of time, right? So these, like, distraction menus and soothing menus are things that people can do to get themselves through the period of time that they have to feel this feeling.
So where is like that the distraction to sort of short circuit, in the sense, the escalating emotional response? Where does that stop, and where does sort of just like avoidance begin?
Really good question. It is hard to kind of get that. I think intentional distraction happens in orange, avoidance happens in yellow, right? Because in yellow, we actually have our higher order thinking online. We're capable of responding to a problem. We're capable of addressing a situation. In orange, we're not really capable yet because we're too flooded by it. When we do this because we're flooded, when we do this in order to kind of protect those values, intentions, and goals and stay busy while we're in this place, then that is intentional. When we do it because we just don't feel like dealing with it, but we're capable of dealing with it, that's avoidance.
Mm. And then how do we make sure that when we are using that intentional distraction,
Mhm.
that we also remember to come back to it, and like
Yeah.
to actually deal with the issue?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And I find that for all of those sorts of things, we need things outside of ourselves, right? That it can't be counting on our brains and our systems to return to something that's uncomfortable. And, like, why would we do that? That's a terrible idea.
Because that's where
Um,
growth happens.
I know, but it's not fun and it hurts.
True story. Yes, the growth never, like, I've yet to have an experience where I'm like, this huge growth I've experienced felt so good going through it. Like, it's
I know.
hard. It is
I
hard.
know. I keep wishing for that pleasant growth. Yeah.
So in
Uh,
the meantime, how do we, again, like, let's really looking at the strategy. So
mhm,
when we're in that more, the orange, you said we're taking that intentional
mhm.
timeout. It's helpful to have sort of externalize that cue to come back to the actual issue. Well, what else? Especially for people who maybe feel like they go from 0 to 60 real fast. Like they don't even feel the
Mhm.
gradual buildup. Like what kind of strategies can be helpful for people that experience that?
I mean, I think that's most people with ADHD, right? Like the 0 to 60 is the way most ADHD brains work. And so they go from green to red. I mean, the number of times I've talked about the emotion meter and people have been like, great, but I don't have orange and yellow. Like I have green, I have red, and then I go green, and then I go red, and it just flip flop between the two. Red, the response in red really, again, I like to keep things simple, really is get space, right? Get space, separate yourself from the situation in any way possible, ideally physically, but sometimes we can't get physical space. And so we have to kind of do that in a mental way, which is way harder. Ideally, get space, whether that's excuse yourself to go to the bathroom. We don't have to like tell people we're getting space, although sometimes that's important too, right? Like with your partner or even with your kids. I mean, the number of times I tell my kids like, mommy needs a minute or mommy needs to take a time out. These are all phrases that I have uttered many times.
It's great
And
modeling, by the way.
exactly. It's a very acceptable thing to do, right? And it's taking care of yourself. And when we get space, we allow the process to unfold, right? When we get space from the situation that's triggering that red feeling, because that red feeling is basically our fight flight system on activate. When we get space, we allow our systems to say, oh, I'm safe. Oh, I can
Yeah.
start to de-escalate, right? But as long as we're in the situation, our systems don't know that. And our systems are on activate, and it's going to stay on activate until we make it go away. And normally we make it go away by like smashing through it in one way or another.
Yeah.
Um,
Or completely
so
shutting down.
yeah, yeah. So step one is always get space.
So let me ask you this. You had mentioned about the power of understanding
Mhm.
and the emotions. So what happens and how do you help clients who really they identify the green, they identify the red, like everything that's in between, they literally have no idea. Like they don't know what they're feeling. How do you help them develop that understanding?
I find that the more we talk about it, the more we work with it, the more you start to look at it, you start to see the gradations. That part of it is that along the path that an ADHD brain takes from green to red, it does pass through yellow and orange. But because if we go back to the switches, right, one of those switches is awareness. So it's not that emotions necessarily are on a switch, but that awareness is. And so that those emotions are growing, but the awareness doesn't switch on until it hits a certain level. And the more we talk about it, the more we examine, the more people actually reflect, then they're more able to move that awareness switch earlier and start to intervene earlier and identify earlier. But that it requires a lot of continual reflection, which is not the way an ADHD brain is usually built.
It's a lot of intentional work that needs to be done
Exactly.
for that to happen. And we look at like the work that Russell Barkley did recently about life expectancy, but
Mhm.
looking and one of the things that I think was sort of not missed, but like was the key finding there was the outliers around like, all right, so you're saying that there's this, what was it? I think it was like a 13-year average, like shorter life expectancy for people with ADHD. Like, well, that's freaking depressing, right? But, like, all right, so what's for the people that didn't actually have that, what's the difference? And it's conscientiousness. And
Mhm.
while conscientiousness absolutely, one of the big 5 sort of personality traits, but I also think that conscientiousness can be built. We can learn how to be more conscientious, and to me, that's great news, right? So we can do things like becoming more aware, and even just having better emotional vocabulary to be able to name and identify those feelings and the gradations of those
Mhm.
feelings, I think is so, so important. I've worked with a lot of people who like I ask how they're feeling and they're like, okay, give me another question because that one's too hard. Right. It's like, I'm sure you've experienced that too.
Mhm.
And it's like, if we don't know how we're feeling, how do we know what's going to motivate us? How do we know what's going to activate us to actual action? Where are our boundaries around stuff? Like, what don't we want to do? And do we understand why we don't want to do that? Because with that understanding, we can then actually communicate that hopefully more effectively versus just avoiding it, burying your head in the sand, and then dealing with the overwhelm of all that goes along with that.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I so agree. And I feel like the way conscientiousness is built for ADHD brains is through systems, right?
Hmm.
I think if we rely on kind of building it internally, at least at first, it becomes just kind of a setup for failure and disappointment and more shame. But if we create systems, external structures that prompt and promote the reflection and conscientiousness, then that can develop into a habit, which can then develop into kind of a personality strength. But that we need to build that scaffolding first while that system is developing internally.
Mm. I love that just the phrase of conscientiousness through systems. I think that is
Mm,
because for everything that we want to do, that is our intention. That is not our sort of natural inclination. Like we need to externalize those cues. It's
yeah.
our brain is giving us the problems. We can't try to solve it with the same brain, right? With the same
Hmm.
solution, right? We
Yep.
have to externalize that. All right. Marcy, we are just about out of time here. Are there any final thoughts that you want to share? And please give your information on how people can reach you and learn more about kind of work that you're doing.
Final thoughts. It's been fun, and thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. People can reach me, my blog, adept.org. My practice is rittenhousepsych.com, and the course is available on the blog as well.
Excellent. Marcy Caldwell, thank you so much for your time and for sharing the what you have today. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD Rewired podcast network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD Rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, ADHDrewired.com. If you are a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all the shows on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson, The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang, The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins, Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown, The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey, Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris, Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden, The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin, The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great, starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD Rewired. Click the button to be a guest at the top of the page and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tibbers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.